The number of stalker cases in Japan has been rising sharply these past few years. Last year alone, there were well over 22,000 incidents reported. I'd like to tell you a story about a stalker, which was told to me by a friend of mine who works at a private investigation company. I'm not going to reveal its name, but let's just call it the Japanese Private Eye Service. Creative, I know. I can't comment on precisely how true this story is, but my friend isn't a sensationalist, and you'll just have to take my word that he's not the type of chap to just make a story like this up. The company specialized in finding evidence for husbands and wives who thought that their partners were cheating on them, but they also gave advice to help solve stalking issues. It isn't uncommon in Japan for people to be reluctant to get the police involved. In January 2013, a young man who we'll call Mr. Ichi returned home from work. As he approached his apartment door, he found a woman just standing there, waiting for him. The woman's name was Keiko. Mr. Ichi had seen her at a friend's house party a few weeks prior, but never got around to introducing himself. Once the party was over, the two never saw each other again. At least that's what Mr. Ichi thought. Unknown to him, Keiko had become obsessed with Ichi ever since she first set eyes on him. At the party, she had stared at him, completely transfixed. She had started following him around ever since. She didn't do anything rash, but once she found out where he lived, she continued to visit his apartment without asking. Sometimes she'd be standing in front of his door, sometimes she'd be outside, just staring from afar up at his window. She wasn't causing him or his home any physical harm, and she left as soon as he told her to. There really seemed to be no logical reason behind her actions. I mean, yes, she was obsessed, but what was she hoping to achieve by just appearing and staring creepily? Sick of the creepy, uninvited visits, but not wanting to blow the problem out of proportion, Mr. Ichi called the Japanese Private Eye Service. Given that Keiko's actions weren't malicious, my friend who worked at the company suggested he didn't do anything rash, and just continue as he was before. Generally speaking, this type of obsessive stalker tends to lose interest if you simply refuse to engage with them. But if she did do something strange, he told him to contact the company straight away. Mr. Ichi followed my friend's advice, and sure enough, Keiko's visits became less and less frequent. A week passed without Keiko showing up at all. Then 2 weeks, a month. It seemed as though the problem had blown over. Relaxed, Mr. Ichi entered his apartment after work, about 2 months after the stalking had stopped. It had been a long day. It was nearing the end of the financial year, and he had a lot of work to be finishing off. It was roughly 10 o'clock at night at that point. After taking off his shoes, he waddled over to the kitchen to fetch himself a beer. He was about to switch on the light to the kitchen when he froze. Illuminated by streetlight seeping in through the window was a shadow. Within a few brief moments, as his eyes became accustomed to the darkness, he realized the shadow was of a human figure. Quickly understanding what had happened, he took a deep breath and flicked the light switch. Standing in front of him was Keiko. Mr. Ichi's first reaction was to look around the room and see how she had broken in. There had been no trace of a forced entrance at the front door. As if reading his mind, Keiko said, "The landlady let me in." Stunned to hear her speak for literally the first time, Mr. Ichi stood like a statue, completely taken aback. It did make sense though. She had visited the apartment so often after all. It wasn't surprising that the landlady thought they were a couple or something. She must have lent her the spare key. The second emotion to strike Mr. Ichi was anger. He bellowed at her to get the fuck out of his apartment. She didn't budge, just stood there, staring. Ichi told her that he got himself a girlfriend, and that she should stay away from him unless she wanted a visit from the police. This was when everything suddenly started to go insane. After Mr. Ichi had stopped fuming, Keiko reached into a handbag that was sitting next to her. Without a flicker of emotion, she brought out a flat object. It was a knife. Terrified, Mr. Ichi backed away from her, but he needn't have bothered. Without a word, she slowly brought the knife up over her head and swung it down on her wrist, slicing away at the flesh repeatedly, taking out chunks, blood splattering all over the kitchen. Ichi carried her to the hospital straight away, half thanks to the fact that the hospital was relatively close by. Keiko survived. That's all that he stuck around to find out. After that, he split. More months passed, and due to a mix of financial problems and a strange sense of guilt about the whole situation, Mr. Ichi eventually ended up moving away from Tokyo and went to live in his hometown with his parents. That's what a lot of these stalkers are good at, making their victims feel like the whole thing is their fault. People asked, but he never told a single person about his reasons for moving back home, not even his parents or siblings. The only other people who knew about Keiko were one or two friends from his old job, as well as the guys from the PI service who he had kept in contact with. He just wanted to put all the madness behind him. Pretty scary story, right? But that's not how it ends. The real insanity happened after he moved away from Tokyo. It had been around 6 months since he moved away, maybe a year in total since the wrist incident. Since then, he had managed to find a new job without too much trouble, mainly thanks to having many contacts in his profession. It was one late evening, and after finishing work, Mr. Ichi walked into the house to hear his parents talking to his brother. He had rarely seen or even heard from his brother in about 2 years. Due to the difference in their age, they weren't really close siblings, and his brother lived and worked far away in Nagasaki. Regardless, Mr. Ichi put on a smile as he entered the living room to greet his brother. But there was also someone else talking lively to them. That voice, it seemed somehow familiar. As soon as he entered, she stood up. Absolutely terrified, Mr. Ichi stood there open-mouthed, gasping for breath. His mum broke the silence with a cheerful grin. "Welcome home, dear. This is Keiko. She's going to be your sister." He turned and looked at Keiko with wide eyes. She smiled. "Nice to meet you, Ichi." Keiko had somehow found out more information about Ichi. She worked out who his family was, where he now lived, and, crucially, where his brother lived. His brother and Keiko had ended up getting engaged. It also turned out that she was 2 months pregnant. Mr. Ichi did eventually end up breaking the news to his parents in private, who actually ended up taking his brother's side, the favoured eldest son. He even pointed out the scars on her wrist. No dice. He never talked to his brother about it, knowing that it would likely lead to blows. Mr. Ichi ended up moving to the USA and working abroad for his company at his own request. As far as my friend at the PI company knows, Keiko and Ichi's brother are still together. But then again, he hasn't heard from Ichi in a couple of years, so who knows? What kind of love drives a person to those sort of extremes? I still wonder if this is truly what Keiko had wished for. Guys, I think I fucked up. I could use some advice. It all started when I broke up with my ex 1 year ago. Her name was Haruka. Haruka was really kind, which was why I started dating her in the first place. But she was also really pessimistic, and as such, it was no fun to hang around with her. She was the kind of low spirit that made everyone around her depressed too, including me. You know the type of person I'm talking about. I think she had a borderline personality disorder. I only really noticed her weird traits when we started dating. Every time I'd finish talking on the phone, she'd keep asking me whom I'd been talking to. If ever I didn't respond straight away, she'd ask me over and over again, and wouldn't stop querying me until I answered. Most times I said it was my parents, and it really was. I could see it in her eyes that she didn't really believe me though. During the weekends, it was a given that I would have to spend my time with her. I'm talking every minute of it. When I was away from town due to work, she'd call me up every hour on the hour. She'd also request evidence that I'd actually been at work. Essentially, Haruka was a control freak. She made sure I had no privacy whatsoever. I think she would have controlled the way I shit and piss if she had the chance. She also started saying really disturbing things to me. Things like, "If you ever leave me for another girl, you know that I'd kill you, right?" I realized that this wasn't normal, but I was still in love with her at the time. At one point though, I decided enough was enough. I went to see her parents without telling her to try and sort out her problem, but before I could even discuss it with them, they started saying things like, "Our daughter's been really depressed over the past few years. She's been in such a bad place ever since she was dumped by her last boyfriend. I'm glad she managed to find a good young man like you. She's in a much better place now. I hadn't even seen her laughing until these past few months. Thank you so much." Her mother was seriously in tears before I could bring it up. It was surreal. I ended up saying everything was fine, and left with a newfound enthusiasm to make it work with her. But it didn't last. Her need for control got worse as the days passed by. Towards the end, any conversation with other girls became completely forbidden. When I mentioned I was arranging a work get-together with some female colleagues, she deleted their phone numbers off my phone. Even casual greetings with neighbors was disallowed if they were a female. At restaurants, if the person bringing out the menus was a waitress, Haruka would be the one to order. She wouldn't even let me look in the girl's direction. I couldn't do this anymore. It didn't matter if she had come from a bad place or not. This just wasn't how human beings were meant to live. I think I would have gone mad if I stayed with her any longer. I went to Haruka's apartment early one weekend. Maybe you'll think I'm a freak when I say this, but I actually scripted out how I was going to break the news to her. I made sure the breakup would be as kind as possible. I sighed a breath of relief when I finished talking. I looked up to see her staring at the floor. I couldn't see the expression on her face at all. Not wanting to make her cry, I turned to leave with an, "I'm really sorry." But as I got up, she suddenly reared her head upwards, and with a massive shriek shouted, "How dare you!" Her face had contorted into a devilish sneer. It wasn't sadness in her eyes at all. It was fury. She looked at me as though she was looking at a cockroach, her contempt for me as clear as day. Before I had a chance to even open my mouth, she grabbed hold of my shirt and threw me to the ground with an almost otherworldly strength. She then ran off into the kitchen, shrieking all the way. Terrified and lost for words, I bolted out of the door, leaving my shoes behind, all the while hearing her shout things like, "You don't deserve to live, you disgusting degenerate. I'm going to cut your fucking throat." And the ever-reliable, "If I can't have you, no one can." I realized that the situation was dire. She had entered the kitchen to fetch herself a weapon. She most likely just wanted to threaten me, but of course I couldn't be sure. Biting my lips in the hallway, I waited for the elevator doors to open. But as they were about to, with a soft groan, I saw Haruka burst out from her room just 10 meters away. Her door opened with such speed and force, it was almost as if she had broken right through the damn thing without opening it. The intensity in her eyes, she was like a woman possessed. As soon as I saw that, I knew that she didn't simply want to threaten me with the knife in her hand. She really did want to slit my throat. Crying out in shock, I left the elevator and stumbled for the stairs to my left. Her apartment was on the 5th floor, but I had no choice. She would have killed me if I waited there for the elevator to open. I know that much for certain. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, but somehow her voice behind me seemed to be getting louder and louder. Screams of, "I'll kill you," mixed in with unintelligible shouting. I got to the ground floor and was about to bolt for my car when I stopped. I looked behind me and back at my car. In a split-second decision, I instead hid behind the shadow of the stairs and waited for her. A decision that to this day I believe saved my life. Instinctively, I realized that by the time I got to my car, opened the door and turned on the ignition, I would have been pounced on. She had been catching up with me, and I could tell by the volume of her screams that she was only 1 floor away. So, terrified, I waited. I heard the screams and thumping of feet getting louder and louder. I bided my time and wished with all my heart that this plan would work. I then jolted my leg forward in front of the stairs. I felt my leg connect with her shin with a painful crack. With a yell of surprise, she tripped, or more accurately, flew into the air in front of her. She crashed face first into the ground with a resounding thud, which seemed to echo around the foyer. My God, I didn't think she'd fall into the trap that well. She must have really lost her mind. So much so that she wasn't paying much attention to her surroundings. I quickly shuffled to the safety of my car and peered at her cautiously. She was still on the ground. Maybe I should call an ambulance, I thought to myself. I could see her moving, however, and I distinctly saw other doors opening as the neighbors peered out to see what the commotion was. No doubt that if she told them what happened, they'd now take her side. Honestly, I didn't want to have anything to do with her at that stage. I just wanted her out of my life as soon as possible. I know it was a dick move, but I left her there. I drove to the entrance and floored it. I moved apartments after that. I told all of my colleagues at work not to give my new address away to anyone, and explained the full details of what had happened. I didn't notify the police, though. I was afraid she might sue me for what I had done, or even press criminal charges of her own. No doubt I'd come away looking like the bad guy, but you have to believe me when I say I know she would have killed me in that building if given the chance. Anyway, all's well that ends well, right? Wrong. A few days ago, I got a letter in the mail. There was nothing written on the envelope, and there was no stamp. It was clear that someone had posted the letter by hand. I opened the letter to find a single, folded piece of A4 paper. On it was only one sentence. I will always be waiting for you. At the bottom was a kiss mark in red lipstick. And there it is. She's found me. What do you think I should do? Was that letter a threat? A promise? I know it's her, and I'm scared. This is a story given to me by a friend of mine. He's a psychiatrist in Tokyo, and has helped, or at least tried to help, a lot of truly disturbed people. We were at a school reunion when he told me about a case he was working on. His subject was a woman who had recently been charged with assault. She was locked up, and it was my friend's job to analyze her mental condition. I think he only told me because we're really close friends, and because he was very, very drunk. I won't be revealing any names or anything, you know, confidentiality and whatnot. But he didn't technically say to me that I shouldn't tell the story to anyone either. Maybe it's because it's rather unbelievable. Honestly, I didn't really believe it either, but I asked him about it again when he was sober, and he confirmed that everything he said was true. Now, I've known this guy for 30 years, and he's never lied to me before, even when we've both been intoxicated out of our minds. But I asked for some written proof, which he actually provided me. This story comes from a written account that the woman made. She was either unable or unwilling to talk at the time, so had to write down her side of the story. It's highly unethical, but regardless, I've transcribed as much as I could, as best as I could, here. What? In that instant, I was stunned. I couldn't understand what he was saying. Break up? What did he mean, break up? I'd devoted the last few years of my life entirely to him. But why? I asked him. You're too heavy. Heavy? What do you mean by heavy? That I'm fat? I asked him. No, you're not fat. I mean, you're emotionally heavy. You're a mental burden. A mental burden. Everything I did with my time was for him. My cooking, my money, all of it was for him. How could that be a mental burden on him? I don't know how to say it. You're so clingy, so overprotective. You don't let me do anything myself. Sometimes I think you'd wipe my ass for me if I asked you to. What's wrong with that, Doctor? So many people would dream to have someone like that in their lives. A second mother. Someone who will always look out for them and provide them their every need. It was all for him. Everything was for him. I'm sorry, darling, I cried. I'll do whatever it is you want me to do. Please! All right then. Get out of my sight. What? Then get out of my sight, as fast as possible. I was astounded. Is that what he wanted? I'd do anything to grant his wish, but then I wouldn't be able to see him ever again. No, that can't happen. I don't want that to happen, I thought to myself. I couldn't bear it anymore, and ran out of his room, crying. I sat outside in the park, swinging aimlessly on the swing set. I'm not very smart, but I racked my brain as hard as I could to work out how I could avoid the breakup. The best thing to do would be respect his wishes, but that would mean I'd have to leave him. That just couldn't happen. So, after some deep thinking, I came up with an idea. This was the only solution. No time like the present. I went to the local convenience store to buy what I needed. When I pressed the buzzer to his apartment, he almost immediately opened the door for me. What do you want? He asked. I want to make it up with you. I told you to stay out of my sight, he bellowed at me. I know. I'll fulfill your wish. I'd do anything for you. And with that, I quickly drew the screwdriver out of my pocket and plunged it into his right eye. At that point, he was rolling on the floor with agony. The poor little thing. I didn't want him to suffer for too long. It was easier the second time. He was on the floor after all. I perched on top of him and brought down the screwdriver again. It narrowly missed his left eye and slid into his left cheek, but it wasn't too difficult to slide the tool along his face and into the socket. Squelch is the sound I think it made. A cute sound, just like him. So, that's her account. Not all of it. Quite a lot of it was uninterpretable according to my friend. Difficult to believe, right? Like I said, I didn't really believe him either. Not until I read this, at least. Then again, the fact he showed me this doesn't mean it's 100% true either. This could have just been the ramblings of an imaginative but insane woman. But like I said, my friend's not much of a liar. Either way, I can kind of see her logic. The man asked her to get out of his sight, and technically, I suppose she did. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I come bearing good news. I've got my October playlist sorted out and all scheduled out, so the lead up to Halloween should be pretty good this year, I think. I'm going to be dropping a special on the 31st, and I've got all the topics figured out before then as well. But that being said, if you like these 2chan sort of videos and you'd like to see more, then make sure to let me know and I can probably throw one into the mix as well, and we'll get another one in before Halloween. Yes. This was a fairly long video, so I won't ramble on for too much longer. But just make sure to smack that like button around a bit, and I'll have some more videos for you guys coming very, very soon. So until then, Lazy Legion, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. Damn, Japan, you crazy. I was 10 years old when this happened. I live in quite a big house, which my parents had bought together back in the early 90s. It was great. The neighborhood was great and the people were amazing. My parents didn't think that anything could go wrong. I was always quite restless when I was young. I could never sleep, and would just lay in bed for hours and hours, staring at the ceiling, with strong hopes that I could finally fall asleep. Insomnia at a young age isn't very fun to deal with. Anyway, one particular night, I sat up from my bed after laying there for a few hours, and reached for a glass of water that was on my nightstand. I shared a room with my sister, who was less than 6 months old at the time. She didn't like to sleep alone, so I offered to share a room with her in hopes that it would help my parents. When I looked over to her crib, I saw a large shadow leaning over her. Its back was to me, and it seemed like quite a big man. "Dad?" I called out, wondering why he was awake when he had work early in the morning. The shadow turned around, and I didn't get a chance to see any details, seeing as the only light source in my room was a dim nightlight. He walked away without a word, and I remember shrugging it off and laying back down again. This went on for a few nights. A man, who I assumed was my father, came in and looked over my sister's crib, even going so far as to pick her up if she cried, and then walked out quietly once he noticed I was awake. One night, I remember finally being able to fall asleep, and feeling rough hands against my cheek as I managed to do so. I was too tired to open my eyes, but I really wish I had. My mum picked me up from school one day, and our usual routine was to go to the store and get some stuff for dinner, and then go straight home. That day, though, my mum was a bit sick and wanted to just go back home. When she opened the door, at the top of the stairs was a large man. He had a bag of bread with him and a pair of my mum's underwear. My mum, who was carrying my baby sister in her car seat, immediately froze. I didn't know what to do either. Without any warning, my mum yelled, "Who the fuck are you?" The man stopped walking and turned to notice us. He gave us a toothy grin and stared at us. I felt fear travel up and down my back. My mum told me to never talk to strangers. She never told me what to do if one was in the house. The man had a gun in his pocket, and when my mum noticed this, she let out a loud scream. She handed me my sister's car seat and pushed us behind her, pushing us outside the door. I heard the door slam, and I began to cry uncontrollably. I knew what guns did, and how intruders used them, so I rushed while holding my sister to my neighbor's house across the street, and banged on the door as hard as I could. My sister started crying along with me, and after what seemed like forever, my neighbor opened the door. "What's wrong?" she yelled when she noticed the two of us. I didn't know how to explain what was going on. I just knew that there was a bad man in our home, and my mum was in there with him. 911 was all I managed to get out, to which my neighbor grabbed her phone and dialed. After I had calmed down enough, I talked with the dispatcher, and we had police heading our way. I can't remember exactly how I explained it to the lady on the phone. I just remember vividly saying that my mum was in trouble. It was our luck that we lived right next to the police station, and they showed up in no time. My mum opened the door when she heard the sirens, and looked ghostly white. I didn't know why, until a couple of years later, my mum told me that the man had gotten away. He escaped through the back door after pointing a gun at my mum's head. He heard the sirens too and bolted. The police did a thorough search of our home, including our attic, which we never used. They found tons of empty bread bags, chips, peanut butter, and a lot of candy. A couple of pairs of my mum's underwear were found as well, sticky. A few blankets were found in the corner, and they dusted for fingerprints. 4 years later, during my freshman year of high school, something else happened. My school is quite a ways from my house, and it takes about 30 minutes to walk home. With a shortcut through a field with a lot of trees, it only takes me about 20. I walked the shortcut alone because I'm the only one in my group of friends who lives in this particular area. A couple minutes into the walk, I felt chills up and down my back again, so I turned around and met eyes with someone I thought I would never see again. It was him. I didn't know what to do, so I just started running and screaming for help. Nobody else was in the field, so I ran as fast as I could to the fence that led into my neighborhood. It's a large fence, so I tossed my bag over while still screaming, and tried to climb it, but felt his hands grab the back of my jeans and throw me off the fence. "You're as beautiful as your mother," he said deeply, giving me the same toothy grin he did 4 years before. I continued to scream for help, but his hand covered my mouth. I heard more footsteps rushing towards us, and I prayed it wasn't his friends coming to help him. To my surprise, one of the school's football players rushed and tackled the man. His fist went flying into the man's face, and I cringed as I heard the crack of the man's nose. He didn't bother fighting back, so I took out my phone and called 911. This time, they got him. 2 years worth of therapy sessions, and I'm finally okay to talk about it. Any time I think back to either of those incidents, I think of how it could have easily been avoided, if only we had checked the attic. I was working for a condo building, letting air conditioning guys look at units within condos. I was just a key holder. One of the last units of the day was a condo. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I opened the door, and immediately a waft of foul smell hit me. Just some rotten eggs, right? I enter the unit with the air conditioning guys, and see some mouldy-looking bread on the counter, and, due to condensation, a sweaty-looking cake on the stove. It's pretty fucking rank in here, I say to the guys. I look into the bedroom, and see an older black woman, with kind of a bad blonde hair dye job, hunched over in bed, in a bit of a yoga pose. Sort of sat up, but head at feet, legs crossed. I'm immediately embarrassed. Whoa, sorry ma'am, I didn't know you were home. No movement. I take a step closer. Ma'am? She's fucking dead, dude, one of the air conditioning guys says, as he hurries out of the unit. His only evidence is the smell, and my tone of voice when I said ma'am. I step a little closer. The woman's skin is bruised, and has mouldy patches on it. This is not a yoga pose. This is a settling into bed pose. I later learned from the police that she was a young Caucasian blonde woman, not an older black woman. Last diary entry was 10 days prior. Pill bottles and a last will and testament were on the bedside cabinet. I can no longer eat wonton soup, which was the first thing I tried to eat 8 hours later. On top of that, I can no longer handle the smell of a dirty fridge, such as mouldy items left by careless co-workers. I also no longer fantasize about how cool the zombie apocalypse would be. The smell alone. This is one of my not-so-wholesome adventures from the ghetto. It deals with attempted kidnapping and trafficking, or possibly even murder. Who the fuck knows? Not me, I'm still here. As can be inferred from the word ghetto, my neighborhood was pretty horrible crime rate-wise, with a strong divide between ethnic groups. I lived in Israel at the time, and seeing as I'm Russian, my friends were also Russian, and what friends they were. Ron, Andre, and Eli were my best friends in 5th grade. We were the coolest 10-year-olds ever. So cool that we had our own Zula. Zula is a Hebrew slang word describing a private place, usually built by you, where you and your buddies can come to chill and hang out. I guess the American equivalent to a Zula would be a treehouse. Ron, Andre, Eli, and I found the perfect place to settle down and claim as our own. The ruins of a roof of an old bunker next to a tree in the middle of a field on a hill. It was positioned on somewhat of a steep hill, and it looked like a concrete bunker in a sea of tall, yellow grass field. We travelled the neighbourhood in search of discarded items and furniture to bring back to our little Zula, and came back with a magnificent cum-stained couch, a rug, and old-school posters of naked ladies. Our Zula was officially complete, the most wholesome one in town. Andre hung his naked ladies on our tree, and was very proud of his work. Andre, Ron, and Eli had a tradition. They'd skip school every Wednesday to hang out at the Zula, so, naturally, I'd start skipping Wednesdays as well to join them. And for a while, it was great. We'd play cards, discuss 5th grade politics, and prank call our neighbours. Until one day, Andre just had to do a stupid. You see, when little horny Andre picked up those naked damsels from the street, he also picked up a business card, an escort service card. One Wednesday morning, Andre decided we just had to prank the poor hooker. Eli, whose role was to be the clique's official dumbass, instantly agreed it was a good idea. Ron and I, however, were a bit more skeptical of Andre's seemingly harmless ruse. But you know how well peer pressure works on 10-year-olds. Andre calls the number and puts it on speaker. It rang and rang until someone answered. A man who I can only imagine was the girl's pimp. The man told Andre he sounded like a big boy in an incredibly creepy way. And mind you, Andre did have somewhat of a deep voice in comparison to normal 10-year-olds. So, when Andre, the beautiful idiot, decided to pretend to buy a hooker, the guy on the phone had no objections. Andre proceeded to give him the closest fucking address to Arzula, and an exact description of how it looks. As soon as the call ended, Ron flipped out at Andre and left. Eli and Andre were super pleased with their prank, and I just sat there on the cum-stained sofa, wondering what the fuck we just did, and is that hooker seriously going to arrive? Andre and Eli were sure that the man got their joke. He didn't. 10, 20, 30 minutes pass, and nothing, no hookers to be seen. We all laugh about our biggest achievement yet, and completely forget about the "what a big voice you have" man. I think it was an hour later, we saw a black van pull over the street next to Arzula's field, the address which Andre gave. Andre and Eli ignore my concerns regarding the inconspicuous van, and so I'm the only one watching it. It went up and down the street, as if it was trying to see if there's any way for it to drive into the field. Impossible, since it's kind of locked between two apartment complexes and a cliff. It then pulls over again at the original spot. At this point, you'd expect a woman to come out. But no. Oh no. Two men get out of the van and start walking up the hill towards our field, towards us. I could feel myself screaming internally as I motioned my buddies to look. We all sort of freeze and have a little "oh my god, what have we done" moment. One of the men yells, "Big boy, I need to ask you something." We practically leave a cloud of dust getting the fuck out of there. We ran up the grassy hill, which gets quite steep as you approach the peak, when Eli falls and scabs his knee. We didn't notice him falling because he didn't make a sound, and by the time we saw him, we were too far, and even more terrified as the men were approaching him and us fast. So we left him there, like the cowardly 10-year-olds we were, and just kept running. We reached another bunker area in the upper street. It is Israel. Bunkers and shelters are everywhere. We hid in one of those 4 concrete shelter buildings, designed like big old boxes. We gently closed the metal door, sat in the farthest, darkest corner, and waited. We could hear the men searching the other shelters, and at this point, we're pretty sure we're going to be found. The moment came, and the men opened our shelter's door. I remember his voice to this day. Cold, eerie, disturbing. "We just want to talk. We came all this way for you." We screamed our lungs out, and by sheer chance, a couple who were walking by with their dogs came to the area to investigate our cries. They scared away the men with threats of the police and their massive German shepherds. We were so fucking relieved. But then we remembered Eli. We quietly creeped down the road towards Arzula, but didn't see Eli anywhere. Andre was the only one of us who owned a cell phone, so calling him was impossible. We thought maybe he had managed to run back home, and so that was our next destination. I remember we looked around carefully for the van. It wasn't parked in our vicinity anymore, so we walked down to that street, on a route which connects to my street, and eventually to Eli's. We managed to get to my street, and at this point we were sure the van and the men were gone. We were wrong. They had circled the neighborhood. We saw them coming back behind us. We freaked out and ran up a long case of stairs. The van almost hit us and the stairs, breaking with a screeching tires sound, and one of the men jumped out of it and started galloping up the stairs, chasing us like a crazed baboon, yelling disturbing things at Andre. "You have such a pretty ass. It's gonna be mine." That was the least disturbing comment of them all. We weren't fast enough to outrun the man, and in the middle of the staircase, just as we were about to break left into a rocky terrain, he grabbed Andre. Andre was screaming hard now. I had never heard him scream like this. I was in tears. Then, in a moment of accidental courage, I picked up a rock and ran down towards the van. The man was so fucking close to shoving Andre in the back of that van when I proceeded to snipe his head with my trusty rock. He had at least made him let go of Andre, miraculously turning him into Speedy fucking Gonzales as he started to run away, still screaming his very soul out. I, on the other hand, was pretty much fucked. The man was so incredibly pissed. I never saw someone that angry in my life. I tried running away, but at this point it was futile. The man grabbed me by my hair and started dragging me towards the van. In what felt like hours being dragged to the van, I saw my older brothers running towards me with a metal pipe. They pried me out of the man's hands and proceeded to beat the living shit out of them. They were apparently attracted by Andre's ear-popping screams. They eventually let both of the men go. You have to understand, in our city and neighborhood, it takes the cops at least 30 minutes to arrive, and nobody really trusted the police. My brothers also feared that they might call someone up to come and get them. This entire live-action movie was done with me getting the arse-whipping of my life from my parents, my brothers getting commended, Andre getting psychological treatment, and Ron getting a pizza, right after he left us with our hooker-calling consequences. Good man. Oh, and Eli got a cool cast on his arm as well, which he broke as he fell down the cliff in an attempt to run away from our kidnappers. We later drew dicks on it, like real friends. We never actually found out who those men were. Our parents forced us to get that business card and give it to the police, but the police never called us back. Don't even know if they investigated it. Our friendship slowly died, as Andre, Ron, and Eli succumbed to our neighborhood's nature and became small-time drug dealers, and started hanging out with questionable characters. So, moral of the story? Don't ever go looking for hookers on shady business cards, not even to prank them. Oh, also, don't skip school. I'm a firefighter and EMT, so it's pretty normal to find a dead body, but one will always stay with me. There was this middle-aged guy who lived in his van out in a parking lot, somewhat out of town. He never bothered anybody, so the police just let him stay there. It was around the middle of July in Arizona, so about 105 to 110 degrees, and we got a call to go and check on him. Nobody had seen him for a while, and somebody had complained about a foul-smelling odour coming from his van. We all knew what we were going to find, but nothing could prepare us for what we actually came across. I opened the back door to his van, and a cloud of flies flew out so thick you couldn't see through it. I was immediately punched in the face by the stench of death, and when the flies cleared out, we finally got to look at what was there. The guy had been dead for at least 2 weeks, and his cats had survived by eating the fleshier parts of his body. I've seen my fair share of corpses, but something about a guy who's been in a van for 2 weeks in the Arizonan heat, with cats eating his body, just stays with you. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, there's a big slice of nostalgia pie for you. Just a nice simple collection of 4 scary stories. Getting back in touch with my roots, as it were. I know a lot of you prefer these type of non-themed videos, and I can see where you're coming from. Personally, I like both styles, and I'll probably be making more of these unthemed videos in the future, since I haven't really made many since the old days, if you know what I mean. But anyway, having said that though, up next are some more Yandere stories for all of you kinky bastards out there to enjoy. Ooh yes. Speaking of which, head on down south, locate that elusive like button, and smash the fudge out of it. What the fuck am I on about? Anyway, until the next one guys, you stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. Ooh shit, here come the popo.